Hey everyone, my name is Beth. If I haven't had the chance to meet you, I get to serve as our lead pastor, and I am just so grateful that we get to be together today on this Father's Day. And I want to say happy Father's Day to all the men here today, watching online, all the men in our lives. Yeah, let's give it up for them. Today, we are celebrating all the fathers, all the husbands, all the coaches, all the teachers, all the cashiers, all the mechanics, all the men who are caregivers, and all the men who are providers. We are celebrating the men who show up in a room and they have this exuberant energy that they bring to the room. And we're also celebrating the very men that quietly lead behind the scenes. We celebrate the men who, you know, if we were to sit across the table from each other and you were to share your story with me and you were to tell me some of the details of your childhood and growing up and you were to share some of those circumstances and through your story I got to hear that unfortunately maybe you didn't have some of the male role models that you needed growing up, but today you are changing a pattern in your life and in your family's life, and you are part of changing a generation. We celebrate you men today. And we know that God has just something really great in store for us as we encourage one another, as we celebrate you, and as we lean more on Him for our leadership. We are in a series, it's called Change the Pattern. And this series is a 5-part series, and today is part 3. Let me go back to part 1. We started with character. Godly leadership is character over charisma. And what does that mean? That simply means who you're becoming behind the scenes. When nobody's watching, when nobody's looking, when it's not out on social media, who are you when nobody's looking? And when the pressure's on, what's coming out of you? That's your character. That's our character. And so we talked about character over charisma. In part 2, we talked about urgency over apathy. This idea that if there are harmful leadership influences happening around us or within us, that we handle that with urgency, not apathy, that we don't turn our heads and ignore it, but instead we address it with a whole lot of urgency. And today in part 3, we are talking about legacy over ego. Legacy over ego. And I want to take a wild guess, and I want to assume some things about all of us. I want to assume that when it comes time, because every single one of us is going to breathe our last breath on earth at some point. At some point, we're going to have our last breath here on earth. And I want to assume that when that time comes for each and every one of us, that we all want to leave a legacy. And when we hear the word legacy, that means that because of the way we lived our life when we still had breath in our lungs, that there are other people that were so impacted by the way that we lived our lives that they lived on some of those specific ways that we lived our life. That's a legacy. And I think we would all nod our heads and say, like, we want to live the kind of life that would leave a great legacy. In the same sentence, what I want to say is I want to make the assumption that sometimes where we get stuck in that is in our everyday, daily decisions. It's like in the everyday choices that we make where we get stuck in that. And so what that looks like when we think about those everyday choices is maybe you choose to say yes to that work thing because you think that you're the only one who can do it, and so it's just one more day or one more work trip away from your family. Or maybe you make a choice to say yes to that vacation. And you say yes to that new car, or yes to that new TV, motorcycle. I'm being so stereotypical. I'm sure there's like other things that men like to buy, but this message is also for women. And so whatever you may choose to spend your money on, but maybe there's some of you today that when you think it with a legacy mindset, if you choose to immediately gratify with spending, you would find that actually that spending leaves you feeling more anxious and not leaving the kind of financial legacy that you would like. And your family is anxious because you are putting yourselves in positions where you're going further into debt or you can't afford those things. Maybe you make choices where you drink substances you shouldn't, or you drink too much, overconsume alcohol at times, or maybe you like to sit on the couch and eat chips and salsa. So do I. Like the lime chips are really good. Right? And so like when we make those choices and it's continual, everyone's like, I'm going to buy some lime chips after this. You should if you haven't had them. But when we make choices to overeat or overindulge or overconsume, what ends up happening is in those daily decisions, we're not having our legacy in mind, knowing that one day we may not either make it to our kids or grandkids, things that we want to make it to, or when that time comes, we won't have the energy or the health to keep up. See, it's in those daily decisions, that tug of war between making daily legacy decisions over immediate gratification, self-centered decisions. It's that constant struggle that we're all going to face, that we are all going to face as humans, is this temptation of self and self-gratification over everything and everybody around us. See, at the very beginning, and when I say the beginning, at the beginning of God's creation in the Garden of Eden, there was one man and one woman, Adam and Eve. And as they lived in perfect harmony, there came a time where a serpent came and said this very thing. The serpent said, as before, when Adam and Eve were running freely, they were tempted, when the serpent said, you can be like God. You can be like God, knowing good and evil. And what is so scary about that statement is that it's not completely false. That temptation that the serpent said to Eve was not completely false, but it was filled with deception. You and I are filled with messages of deception every single day, of empty promises, of sales pitches and marketing and promotions, of items and things and pills and different things that are promised to give you a better, healthier life or more freedom that actually leave you feeling empty. And the serpent said, you can be like God, knowing good and evil. And it was that temptation that led to the very first sin in our world. The very first act of sin that separated us in our relationship with God. You can be like God. See, pride comes before the fall. And just as true as it was back then, it is just as much true today that pride comes before the fall. How often do you and I, we would never verbalize it or say it like this, but how often do we act in such a way that we are like God? Where we live in such a way, where we make choices, we don't need to pause and pray about that because we already know what to choose. We don't need to wait to hear from God and whether we should take this direction or that direction, or we don't need to step into that relationship and ask for forgiveness because don't you know what they did to me? I don't need God for that. They just need punishment. What are the things or where are the areas in your life where you choose your God? You choose you're the judge, you're the jury, you're in charge. See, pride comes before the fall. That's our ego. And you and I, we all struggle with that. We all struggle with that. When we believe that what we have is not enough, is when we start to blur and cross the lines between living a surrender-centered life, which a surrender-centered life is an other-focused life. It's like, God, I surrender my life to you. I will follow you. I will obey you. No matter the cost, no matter the sacrifice, my life is not my life anymore as a follower of Jesus. My life is your life, and I'm here to be a vessel. That's a surrender-centered life. A self-centered life is surrounded by self. It's all about me and what I want, when I want, how I want, the way I want. I. So what we're going to do today is we're going to have several points and several different opposites to talk about the difference between a legacy living life and an ego-centered life. And the first one is surrender-centered and self-centered. So there's a big difference between living your life in a surrender-centered way, legacy-focused, or a self-centered, ego-focused way. Today we're going to be challenged by this thought, that godly leadership, it's a step further. It's not just how we live our life and the example that we live our life by, but the godly leadership intentionally raises others up by living with legacy in mind. I'm going to say that one more time. This is the thought that we're going to be challenged by today, is that godly leadership intentionally raises others up by living with legacy in mind. And as we think about changing the patterns in our lives and the patterns in our families, I'm going to repeat it again, and I know I said it earlier, but the truth is there are a lot of stories of homes and a lot of stories of families where either the father or male figure that was meant to lead that home is either absent, they were never there, or they work a lot and they're not there and weren't there, or they are physically present but emotionally absent, and there's no connection. And so when we think about changing the pattern, we think about, for sure, people, for all of us, when there isn't if you were not fortunate enough to have a godly example of a man in your home, you may find yourself in spaces where it feels really overwhelming to figure out how to change the pattern, how to live in such a way that you did not see modeled for you. And here's the encouragement I want to give you today. I want to give you the encouragement that says it's not too late. It's never too late. And it's not too late today to change the pattern. And why can I confidently say that? And it's because God can change anybody, anytime, from anything. God can change anybody, anytime, from anything. And today might be the day where you decide you're going to be part of changing the pattern in your life. And so I want to give a really clear example of this. When we think about Paul, it's the Apostle Paul. And we've been in this series, Change the Pattern, and it's based on the book of the Bible named Titus. And really the book of the Bible in the New Testament, which means everything about Jesus' life and after. The book of the Bible that's named Titus is actually a letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to his young mentee, this young man that he was raising up, this young man that he was empowering and equipping. And Titus wasn't the only one. He also empowered and equipped Timothy. And you can read some of those letters in the New Testament as well. But in Titus specifically, as he is writing this letter to Titus, he is helping him to understand how to lead this church, because one of the things Paul did is he started a bunch of churches, and he was like the front runner when Jesus died and rose again and is seated now at the right hand of God our Father. He passed on to all of these leaders to build his church, to build the faith of people. And Paul took that and he began to start all of these churches. If you're not familiar with Paul's story, it's important to become familiar with Paul's story, because that's not where Paul started. Paul started as a man that was named Saul. And Saul was a Roman citizen, and that God was going to use that detail of his life later on when Saul became Paul. And you know what Saul did for a living? He persecuted Christians. He chased them down and he murdered them. And so, as you can imagine, the life change that happened one day when Paul was walking on the road, when he had an encounter with Jesus that completely changed his life. And he went from Saul to Paul. That's one of the things that God did, is he would change people's names to help recognize that their life has been transformed. And so Paul's life had been completely transformed by Jesus Christ. He had been changed, and he was just walking on the road. Today, we sit here today, and we are together today, and we can have hope that we can change. That we can change the patterns that we've set in our own lives that are not good, that are not healthy, and we can have hope that we can change the patterns that maybe somebody else set in our lives. In 1 Corinthians 11:1, here's what Paul said, and this was another letter that he wrote, but he wrote this one to the church of Corinth. And Paul said, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. Follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. When you first read that, you might think like Paul's a little like egotistical. He's not. Let me explain it. When he wrote this letter to the church of Corinth, at that time, the Gospels were not written. The Gospels are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they tell the account and the stories of Jesus and his life on earth and how to live like him and how to lead like him. And that was not available for the people in the church of Corinth. And so Paul was telling them, hey, follow my example, because I know the example that Jesus Christ has set, and I'm called to live in that way. And so as you follow my example, and I am following Jesus Christ's example, we are following Jesus Christ together. That's a great picture for you and I. That is a great picture for you and I, that as I follow Jesus, and as I invite other people to follow my example, which feels weighty. I don't know anybody else, that feels weighty to me. Sometimes I get a little insecure and I'm like, don't follow me, which really I don't want you to follow me ever. Follow Jesus Christ. But the truth is, if you are a follower of Jesus today, you have influence in this world to share God's hope and love and truth with the rest of the world. This life isn't just your life. You are meant for more. And so Paul's saying, follow my example as I follow the leadership of Jesus Christ. And so let's get into his letter to Titus. And as we do that, just again, I want to emphasize that Paul empowered Titus. He empowered Timothy. He empowered these young men that probably were ill-equipped and unqualified to do the things he was asking them to do. But he did it anyway. He trained them up. He spent a lot of time with them, and then he sent them. And I want to ask you today, like, who are you bringing with you? Is there anybody that you have intentionally chosen to bring with you? When I say that, I mean like in your faith journey. Are you sharing your faith? Are you sharing what God is doing in your life with anybody else in your life? So here's the question: how can you live with a legacy mindset? And a legacy mindset that doesn't point people to you, but points people to Jesus Christ. See, Paul instructs Titus in this letter. He says to Titus, and he's asking him to address all this corruption and all of this harmful leadership and to do it really urgently. And then he says in Titus 2, verses 1 and 2, he says, he's telling Titus, he says, you, however, must teach what is appropriate to sound doctrine. What's he telling Titus? He's saying, Titus, don't go around sharing your truth. You got to share God's truth. You've got to be grounded in God's truth. Men and women, are we grounded in God's truth? Are we sharing what's biblical to other people? Or do we more often share our opinion or share advice? He's telling Titus, he's saying, teach what is appropriate to sound doctrine. And then verse 2, he says, teach the older men. I want to take another part. Teach the older men. He is telling Titus as a young leader, he's saying, teach the older men. And I'm not going to put a number age on that, because like I'm in the older category these days, depending on how you look at it. So we're not going to put a number on that. So however you would define it, older men, older men, I want to challenge you to have your eyes wide open and to see the opportunity of some of the young men in your life. Maybe it's someone you work with. Maybe it's someone in your family. Maybe it's your son, who their passion and their spiritual maturity with the Lord has a lot to teach you, and you would be open to that. We can teach each other a lot regardless of age. Paul tells Titus, teach the older men to be temperate. Temperate means sober. Teach them to be sober, worthy of respect, self-controlled, and sound in faith, sound in love, sound in endurance. Saying a man who is sober, a man who is worthy of respect, a man who is self-controlled, a man who is sound in the faith, a man who is sound in love, a man who is sound in endurance. See, a legacy-focused leader teaches for transformation. An ego-centered leader teaches for applause. And so what that means is motivation matters. Paul was telling Titus, hey, teach from a sound doctrine and teach these biblical things. Respect and control, endurance, love. When we teach for transformation, we're teaching from a place of replicating Jesus. When we teach for applause, we're in a spot where we're like, hey, look at me. Like, did you see what I did there? It's like when you accomplish that big thing at work, or maybe you like knocked it out of the park. You're a husband and you like planned a date night for your wife and you got the sitter. These are just ideas. And like you just like knocked it out of the park and you're like, look at me, I did it. But really when you look at it from a legacy mindset, what that is that is serving someone else in your life, right? That's laying down your life, in a sense, for your wife. That's just one example. There's so many other examples. When you're really successful at work and you can go home and you can say like, man, I'm so grateful for the gifts God gave me. That's a different mindset than saying, look what I did. Paul goes on to tell Titus some things for women specifically in the middle here, if you are reading through in the Bible reading plan. But since it's Father's Day, we're going to skip that part. But you should go back and read it. So we're going to skip that. In Titus 2, verse 6, here's what Paul tells Titus. He says, similarly, encourage the young men. So not just the older men, but also encourage the young men to be self-controlled. In everything, set them an example by doing what is good. And then he says, in your teaching, show integrity, seriousness, and soundness of speech that cannot be condemned, so that those who oppose you may be ashamed because they have nothing bad to say about us. When Paul says us, what's he saying? He's saying followers of Jesus, the family of God. When we live in such a godly way that nobody around could say anything negative about because we are following and living out the example of Jesus Christ. It doesn't mean, like that's a super high calling, isn't it? It feels like a high responsibility. It is a high responsibility. And part of that is when we mess up and we make a mistake and we fail, we are the first to say, hey, God, I messed up, I'm so sorry. Will you forgive me? Like that's living in a godly way. What would it look like to live out God's word in such a way that it impacts people to live more like him? What about you today? Would you say you need more self-control? Where might you need more discipline in your life? Have there been some good examples of this kind of leadership in your life? Could you name them? Truett Cathy, he's the founder and owner of Chick-fil-A. And he wrote a book, and this book is called, It's Better to Build Boys Than to Mend Men. I'll say that one more time. He wrote a book, it's called, It's Better to Build Boys Than to Mend Men. And one of the quotes is this. He said, raising boys to become responsible, compassionate, and successful men requires proactive effort and guidance. And so do you have a plan for your own growth? And do you have an intentional plan to raise up the young men around you? Do you have an intentional plan for your own girls, so you're living by the example of Jesus Christ more and more with every day? And do you have a plan to raise up the young men around you? I want to encourage, we have so many incredible men who are showing by example what it looks like to serve, what it looks like to be inconvenienced. We have men who show up here on Sundays specifically between 6:45 and 7 a.m. to get ready for our production and our band. And we have men who are serving in our Prairie Heights kids every single week, helping keep our kids engaged and learning about Jesus. We have security and we have building hosts who are cleaning up spills. And so when I say our, like all of our kids at Prairie Heights are all of our kids at Prairie Heights. We are responsible as a church family to raise up young boys to become men of God. And when our young boys come in and they see all these men in all these places serving in all these ways, they're seeing an example of Jesus. So thank you. Men, we don't need you to have it perfect. Ever. We just need you to show up. And you do. And we're so thankful. We're so thankful. You're here today. You're watching online today. Men, way to go. Way to go, because there's young boys and young girls who are watching. What does that mean from a legacy and an ego perspective? It means hands-off wisdom. A legacy mindset takes the things that you are learning and intentionally raises up young boys and hands off the wisdom. An ego-driven leader will hoard the wisdom, keep the information, keep the things they're learning, too insecure to share their hang-ups and their flub-ups. Flub-ups, not a word, but you guys get it. Ego. See, it's crazy because we think pride is like this, and maybe it's just me, but you imagine pride to be like this big, angry, you think you're right all the time, macho thing, and women struggle with pride just as much as men struggle with pride. And I want you to know insecurity is one of the biggest telltales of pride. Underneath that pride is just a bunch of insecurity. And the only person who can make us all secure is Jesus Christ. It's Jesus Christ himself. And that's why these last two verses are the bread and butter. This is it. This is what matters. If you get nothing out of today, this is what matters most. Titus 2, verse 11, for the grace of God has appeared that offers salvation to all people. To all people. Every single human being is worthy to be saved and is saved by Jesus Christ. All people are welcome to know the Lord. All people fall short of the glory of God. It says, for the grace of God has appeared that offers salvation to all people. It teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in this present age. What does that mean? That means that you cannot live a high calling of being an example of Jesus Christ on your own. You cannot pull up your bootstraps enough. You cannot manage your way and say, I'm just gonna wake up tomorrow and stop doing the thing that I always keep doing. Good luck. That will last a few weeks, maybe a few months. But without Jesus Christ, you and I are not actually changed. It is through the grace of God that meets us every single day that we are changed. It is by the grace of God that we can show up to lead in a legacy living way. It is by the grace of God that we can raise up the next generation to know and to love the Lord. It is by the grace of God that you are forgiven of all your sins. See, how do you live a life of legacy? The legacy life is living out of grace, not living out of guilt. An ego-centered leadership life lives out of guilt. Because what guilt does is, I did something wrong, I thought something wrong, I sinned, and then it begins to be shame, guilt, shame, guilt, shame, guilt, shame. It turns into I am bad, I am not enough, I'm a mess up, I'm a screw up, I'm a failure, which is actually an ego-centered leadership when you live out of guilt and shame. But friends, when you and I live out of grace, when we live out of grace and freedom to say, I need Jesus every single day to live up to the calling that he has for my life. To say, I humbly submit, Lord, that this is your life, not my life. On my own, I'm gonna mess it up. But with you, Jesus, I can attain some of the things that you've called me to. I can be the person that you've called me to be, but I can't do it apart from you. I can only do it with you. That's living out of grace. See, leaving a legacy of who you are becoming in Jesus Christ with every day. It's in the everyday small moments, in the little choices that you make. Because friends, the legacy is not you. It's Jesus through you. The legacy is not you. It's Jesus through you. And so as we get ready to close and pray today, I've invited my husband Kyle to come on up, and he's gonna join me and just share a couple things and then pray for all of us, but pray for the men specifically. So thanks for joining us. And aren't you so happy for all the men who are part of our church?
Love it. Love each and every one of you. So yeah, thank you. I appreciate
so much
you.
Gratitude.
Yeah. I'm going to share a quick farm story with you guys. There's this old farm story that goes a little bit like this. There was this farmer who was out mending fences with his boys. And he had a handful of his boys out there, and he's got the young boy who's kind of squirrely and can't pay attention, and then he's got his older boys who kind of just think they're too good to be mending fences, and it's kind of a process, and it looks a little bit like a hot mess, and it just so happens that his neighbor drives by. He rolls down his windows, and he goes, I think you could fix your fence a lot faster if you just did it yourself. And the farmer kind of quit what he was doing, and he stands up and stretches his back a little bit and wipes the sweat from his brow, and he goes, well, you misunderstand what I'm doing, sir. I'm not mending fences, I'm raising boys. See, this farmer knew that in order to raise men of character and consequence, to raise boys into men who had integrity and impact, he knew that his legacy was not just that his farm would have great fences, but his legacy was that he would grow boys into men. And the fixing of fences was the means to do that. Because he knew that one day his boys would grow up and get married. His boys would be fathers and husbands and people in the church community. That was his legacy. I want to read you a quote here. Until we know the story we are in, we will never know the character we are called to become. It is important that young men get a sense of a larger story and tradition so they have some context for living well and break the delusion that the world revolves around them. I think, just like we talked about today, that too many men in this world lead a self-centered life. They live for themselves. And then, if you're anything like me, on the other end of the spectrum is that we realize the weight of what we're supposed to do, and the shame and guilt of not fulfilling what we're supposed to can kind of hang us up. And I would just love to pray for each and every one of you guys, wherever you are on that spectrum. So if you're a guy, young or old, I'd love for you to stand up right now. I'm going to pray over you. So go ahead, stand up. Whether you are young, old, whether you got a son or not, I would love to pray a blessing over you. So guys, go ahead and stand up. Production people, I'm praying for you too. If you're at the sound booth, stand up. If you're watching online, I would love for you guys just to stand up as well, and so I can pray over you. Dear Heavenly Father, you have placed an incredible calling upon us men to lead with character and consequence, to be men of integrity and impact. And the world has sold us these subtle lies that lead us into a world of self. And then at other times we feel the guilt and shame of not living up to what we're supposed to. And that is why I love that we ended with the verse by grace. For by grace. For by grace. The word grace is so powerful, and it means that we can get off of this performance treadmill where we have to do, and we can simply be a son of you, Heavenly Father. God, I pray that you would fill each and every man in this house with a fire, put a fire in his spirit to be a godly man that we've read about in the book of Titus. I pray that you would raise up the next generation to lead our churches and our communities, to lead our families. God, we love you and we trust and we believe in all these things. In your name we pray. Amen.